You want answers?
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
You want answers?
You have offended my family.
I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth.
And you have offended a Shaolin temple.
You can't handle the truth.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Radical Rant.
Well, today we've got quite the story for you here, and it came up so quick I didn't even have time to finish the graphics here, but we'll get this up and running as fast as we can. Let me just finish that word, and then we'll talk the rest of it. Anyway, today's big story has to do with revelations that were reported by Reuters, the news agency, and basically the story is classified DEA division supplies secret tips to the police. Remember that traffic stop you got busted for weed? The one where the cops said you made an improper lane change? Remember how you were driving so carefully that night, knowing you had marijuana in your trunk? Out of all the cars on the freeway, some that were weaving and speeding and driving far worse than you were, how in the world did you manage to arouse the suspicion of Officer Observant and his trusty dope dog Bustum? Because unbeknownst to you, and most importantly, your defense attorney, a classified division of the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, secretly tipped off the cops about you. The program is called the DEA's Special Operations Division, or SOD, and a new report from Reuters blows the lid off the use of, quote, intelligence intercepts, wiretaps, informants, and a massive database of telephone records, end quote, from federal investigations in domestic policing. SOD comprises units from many agencies, including FBI, CIA, IRS, Homeland Security, and the National Security Agency, or NSA, which was revealed by whistleblower Edward Snowden to be engaged in data mining and spying on U.S. citizens. Few organisms thrive in darkness and bullshit. Among them are magic mushrooms and bureaucracies. SOD is no different. SOD was originally formed in 1994 with a few dozen employees and a mandate to pursue Latin American drug cartels. Since then, it has grown to several hundred employees and a secret budget estimated at $125 million a year. And like magic mushrooms, SOD takes us through the looking glass to a land where nothing is as it seems, specifically your right to a fair trial. Now, that federal cops might help state and local cops catch drug criminals isn't the shocking part. There's nothing illegal or untoward about that. The shocking part of SOD's operations is something known as parallel construction. This is a technique SOD instructs the local cops to use once SOD has given them a tip, so all evidence of SOD's involvement is erased from the forthcoming trial. It's a little like those little blinking lights in Men in Black that wipe your memory clean. This is from the Reuters report. Quote, remember that the utilization of SOD cannot be revealed or discussed in any investigative function, end quote. A document presented to agents reads. The document specifically directs agents to omit SOD's involvement from investigative reports, affidavits, discussions with prosecutors, and courtroom testimony. Agents are instructed to then use, quote, normal investigative techniques to recreate the information provided by SOD, end quote. A former federal agent in the northeastern United States who received such tips from SOD described the process, quote, you'd be told only be at a certain truck stop at a certain time and look for a certain vehicle. And so we'd alert the state police to find an excuse to stop that vehicle and then have a drug dog search it, end quote, the agent said. After an arrest was made, agents then pretended that their investigation began with the traffic stop, not with the SOD tip, the former agent said. The training document reviewed by Reuters refers to this process as parallel construction. In a sense, parallel construction is like money laundering. You know, in money laundering, you make money from drugs, and then you put it into some business or some activity that's legit to make it look like the money was generated from legitimate business, like dry cleaning in the case of Breaking Bad, right? Well, this is money laundering. This is investigation laundering. This is tip laundering. This is the idea of taking the facts as they were, the case as it began, as it was investigated, and then making a whole new trail of investigation to cover that up. as if it never existed. Now, the problem with this technique is this little thing called the Sixth Amendment, which recognizes a defendant's right to, quote, compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, end quote. So, when you get stopped by Officer Observant, your defense attorney can issue subpoenas to the officer, to the trainer of the drug dog, even other witnesses to your driving that night. But with parallel construction, your defense attorney has no idea that the original tip to bust you came from some wiretap in some unrelated investigation, or even an NSA data mine of your private Facebook messages or emails. Your attorney is effectively shut out from an entire line of investigation that may lead to evidence that exonerates you, or at least reveals enough wrongdoing by law enforcement to suppress the evidence obtained in your case. Now, SOD claims that such techniques must be kept confidential in order to protect classified information, despite the long-standing courtroom practice of having the judge examine such evidence in private chambers to determine what can and cannot be exposed at trial. Prosecutors are also kept in the dark about tips from SOD being the justification of their prosecutions. One federal prosecutor in Florida dropped his case when he learned the DEA had lied to him about SOD's involvement, telling Reuters that he lost confidence in the investigation. However, most cops don't worry about tips from SOD being exposed in court. Thanks in part to draconian mandatory minimum sentencing laws for drug crimes, most cases in which SOD brought down a drug suspect end in a plea bargain. So the original source of the evidence against a defendant is never explored in open court. Now, another part of this that is so frustrating and offensive is that a lot of the money, the budget, and the training and the authorization for the use of this data mining powers come from a post 9/11 mindset where we got to go after the terrorists. The Daily Mail in the UK, in their story, a secretive DEA program is using terrorism task forces to help local police make small-time drug busts. They note that joint terrorism task forces have been involved in helping out with these sort of activities. From their report, quote, a secret U.S. DEA unit that parcels out sophisticated intelligence to other law enforcement agencies is also using task forces set up to prevent terrorism in order to help police departments build minor local drug cases. The Joint Terrorism Task Forces are law enforcement coalitions administered by the FBI that generally include representatives from up to 40 different federal agencies, plus state and local police departments based near each task force's centers of operation. One of the sources say JTTFs are used all the time to help arrest minor drug offenders at the local level. Local law enforcement quietly passes that information on. And Finn Seelander, who's been a guest on our show, a 17-year veteran of the DEA, says there are tons of these task forces, but the Joint Terrorism Task Forces are used for this absolutely. Russ Jones, also working with LEAP, he was a California narcotics officer. He told the Mail Online, quote, it was always an unwritten practice to hide sources, and that was called creative report writing. It was done all the time in law enforcement and still is apparently now with official sanction, end quote. There are 103 such joint terrorism task forces nationwide. 71 of them were instituted after the 9/11 attacks. At least one joint terrorism task force is based in each of the 56 cities where the FBI has a field office. Each unit typically includes reps from the NSA, FBI, DEA, Federal Air Marshals, Department of Defense, Homeland Security, Secret Service, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. And part of what they're data mining here had to do with, in one of these reports, talking about a database, this Reuters database that has this Reuters report talks about the database that has over 1 billion records in it that are being sifted and, looked at for coordination and cooperation to try to find terrorists, presumably. This information is now being given routinely to our local and state police for small-time drug cases. The email I got from the Drug Policy Alliance says last week, it mentions all the other scandals that are going on in the DEA and calls for a congressional investigation, a top to bottom review of the DEA for not just this scandal where they're using spying on American citizens and trying to hide from defense attorneys and prosecutors the source of the tips in these investigations. But we also had the lawsuit that was just settled for Daniel Chong, the UC San Diego student who was left alone for 5 days to die by the DEA. They had to pay $4.1 million for him. Members of Congress still want to know about the drug war operation in Honduras last year that led to the massacre of 4 indigenous civilians, 4 native citizens of Honduras. In 2011, the Fast and Furious scandal was shown that DEA agents smuggled or laundered millions of dollars in drug profits from Mexican drug cartels and let guns walk across the border that ended up killing a Border Patrol agent. Defense attorneys in Arizona are claiming misconduct because the DEA has rehired Andrew Chambers, an informant who was terminated by the Department of Justice years ago for serial perjury. DEA's rehired that guy. DEA continues to raid and arrest patients and providers in the medical marijuana states. And DEA Administrator Michelle Lenhart, who has direct ties to the Andrew Chambers scandal, by the way, and most of the other scandals, can't even tell you whether or not marijuana is more harmful than heroin. She was also involved in a scandal called House of Death, when a DEA informant helped murder at least 12 people in Juarez. And she has overruled the administrative law judges of the DEA when they have come forth saying that Professor Craker should be allowed to grow medical marijuana and test it, that marijuana ought to be rescheduled. These continuing scandals of the DEA, now capped off with this Special Operations Division scandal, calls for not just a review in Congress of the Drug Enforcement Administration, but the abolishment of the Drug Enforcement Administration. It is time for us to fold DEA and put the coverage of drugs and the use of drugs back into the Food and Drug Administration. They keep saying they want FDA control, FDA approval. Let's let the FDA, let's let scientists, let's let doctors, let's let researchers decide what our policies on marijuana should be. That's all for the Radical Rant today. Thanks for joining us, and stay tuned for our new summer schedule. Now that we're in the summer festival season, Toker Talk Radio is on hiatus, and we've moved some of our most popular shows to the 4 o'clock hour. Coming up next, Stony Sundays with Coral Reefer, the show from just yesterday. Check out Coral Reefer on Stony Sundays and more of our favorite shows, including Danny Danko, Subcool, Jorge Cervantes, and Jody Emery, all at the 4 o'clock hour. And at 7 o'clock hour, more of our most popular shows tonight, including Drug Truth Network, followed by a replay of the new Viper Hour. Also at 5 o'clock, stay tuned for Herb Thrasher Flower Hour. For 420 Radio, I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it.